Hello everyone, my name is Rachel. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am here to do my mid-November reading wrap-up. So I have 11 books to talk about today because I am doing the 30 and 30 manga challenge, and that is being hosted by Ashley, Shay, Bree, and Izzy. I will be sure to have them linked down in the description below. So while I have read over like 26, 27 books, something like that, this month, a good portion of those are volumes of manga, so I am planning on doing a completely separate video at the end of the month doing a recap of my 30 and 30 challenge, how that went, what I thought of the manga that I read, all of that. So I'm not going to be talking about manga in this video. I'm just going to be talking about the books that I got to so far this month. So I do have 11 books. One of them I literally just finished right before pressing record, so I'm very excited to talk about that book when the time comes. I usually just talk about the books as I read them, like chronologically. So the first couple of books that I want to talk about were some things that I read for the fanfiction readathon. I will have my weekly vlog linked up in the cards above. That was a crazy week for me, because I went to see Demi Lovato in concert, which was absolutely life-changing and incredible. I also went to my childhood best friend's wedding, and that was also just stunning and amazing to be a part of. And there were just all kinds of highs and lows, everything in between. But I read some really good fan fiction over that week. So for this wrap-up, I decided to just talk about the fanfics that were my highlights of that week, my favorite things that I read. So once again, if you want to hear me discuss everything that I read for that readathon, definitely go check out my vlog. But I have 3 fics that I wanted to feature in this wrap up. First off is All He Thinks About Is Me by Separatist_apologist. Any fics I mention in this video will be linked down in the description below, because I know that it's hard sometimes to find specific fics on Archive of Our Own, which is the fanfiction site that I personally use. But this is a Feyre and Rhysand fic, and it's about like 5 chapters long, I'd say about 100 pages. So it's as if Feyre and Rhysand fell in love while under the mountains. So during the last part of A Court of Thorns and Roses, book 1 of the series. So I do want to throw out there that the first sex scene between them is definitely dubious consent. I think there's other scenes throughout this fic that you could also argue are dubious consent, and the author is very upfront about that in the content warnings, the tags, things like that. But I absolutely adored this. I loved seeing Feyre and Rhys fall for each other while in this just dire situation where they're both so powerless for different reasons. It was just such a cool story. I thought it was told really well. The sex scenes in this were hot. It was just perfect for me. I loved the vibe, so I gave it 5 stars. Definitely recommend. And then I also did want to quickly mention All That Time Devours, which is by the same fic author. This is another Feyre and Rhysand fic, and it's also dubious consent, but this is told in an alternate universe where it feels like there's no magic at all. Basically, Feyre's father is in a lot of debt from Rhys. It seems that Rhys is kind of like an underground boss, like a kingpin or a mafia boss, something like that, and Cassian and Azriel are like his 2 goons. And so he just shows up to their house, beats the shit out of Feyre's father, and her father is like, I'll give you anything, I'll do anything, just don't kill me, don't hurt my daughters. And he's like, I want Feyre. And her father says yes, and Rhys beats him up even more for being willing to part with his daughter. And then, yeah, he takes Feyre away. They end up getting married. Steamy times ensue, and this was just really fun. I gave this one 4 stars, but I just really like this author's writing style and the way that she writes the ACOTAR characters. There are quite a few other fics that this author has written. It seems that they exclusively write ACOTAR fics, so I'm definitely looking forward to checking out more from them in the future. Then we have my favorite read of the readathon, Safe Word is Devil's Snare by Shaylani. This is a Neville and Hermione fic. So to give you a very basic synopsis, the wizarding world is saying that years after the war, a lot of witch wizard couples are having squibs. So that is children born from magical parents, but they themselves don't have magic. And so through like a ton of research that Hermione does, she comes to the conclusion that people need to be magically compatible in order to have children with the strongest magical capabilities. So they create this situation where they bring in volunteers, so single witches and wizards, and they all get a spell cast on them. And so depending on who they look at throughout the room, each person has an aura about them. And the person who has like the brightest glow is the person that you are the most compatible with. And so she finds that Harry has a pretty bright glow, but she's like mortified about that because she really just views him as a brother. And by the way, her and Ron did get married, but they ended up getting divorced some years later. I have never felt convinced that Ron and Hermione should have ever been a couple. I don't see it, you know? And so then Neville comes in late, and Neville's glow is so bright that it's like blinding to her. So Neville and Hermione do end up dating, and through that Hermione learns that Neville is a dom. He is into BDSM. And so one of the things I loved about this fic is that Neville is what I would call a soft dom. And I've never read about a character quite like him in a BDSM romance. So for that reason alone, I would highly, highly recommend that if you're looking to get into BDSM romances. This was also just a really sweet and swoony romance. I mean, I love Neville with my heart and soul, so I definitely need to read more fics that feature him. So next up we have Call Me Crazy by Melanie Harlow. This is book 3 in her Bellamy Creek series, which is a small town romance series. Basically, I needed an audiobook to listen to while I was driving back and forth from my friend's wedding. So this was just a great one to listen to. I always enjoy a good small town romance, and I have really been enjoying this series in particular because Melanie Harlow writes truly sexy small town romances, which is not something that I've read all that often. I find that in general, small town romances tend to be a bit conservative when it comes to the amount of steam or spice in them. But this is book 3 of the series, so we have Enzo and Bianca, and they have always kind of hated each other, but through like miscommunication and misunderstandings basically. And especially in the previous book of the series, which is Make Me Yours, and I really, really enjoyed that book. We get to see in that book how Enzo and Bianca bicker and banter, and they're both in the same line of work. But basically, Enzo is now in his mid-30s, and his father has made it known in no uncertain terms that unless Enzo settles down and gets married, he will not leave his company to Enzo. And so he's just looking to marry kind of anyone at this point. So at the very beginning of this book, he proposes to this woman that he's dated for a couple of months. She turns him down. Bianca is in the same restaurant, and so she just approaches him. They start talking. At first, there is some animosity between the two of them, but they agree that a marriage of convenience would be great for the both of them. One, for Enzo, but also Bianca, because she desperately wants to have a child. And so they agree to these terms, they get married. So as much as I enjoyed this book, just like I have the other 2 books of the series, I definitely did have some issues that I wanted to bring up. So this is advertised as a hate to love and enemies to lovers romance, but the animosity between Enzo and Bianca dissipates by, I would say, the 2nd or 3rd scene that they're on page together. Now, they still kind of bicker a bit back and forth, but it's definitely not the level of animosity that there was in book 2 of the series, which was kind of disappointing. I wanted to see more of that hate, you know, of the bickering between the two of them. Another thing is that this book gave me emotional whiplash. There were parts of this that were extremely funny. There's one sex scene in particular that is going to live in my head rent-free, where Enzo decides to pretend to be Edward Cullen from the Twilight Saga because it's established earlier in the book that that is Bianca's favorite book series and Edward Cullen is her book husband. So he puts on this ridiculous like vampire cape and he's naked underneath and he's trying to seduce her while having this ridiculous like Dracula accent. And then literally 2 pages later, it's an extremely serious scene because Bianca is dealing with fertility issues throughout this whole book. So yeah, just a few pages after that incredibly hilarious scene, she is in despair over not getting pregnant. Like it's a lot, you know? So I do feel like the tone was just kind of all over the place, but at the end of the day, I still did really enjoy this one. There is a lot of miscommunication going on, misunderstandings, things like that. So just know that this wasn't a perfect book, but I did really enjoy it for what it was overall, and I did give it 4 stars. Next up, we have A Caribbean Heiress in Paris by Adriana Herrera. This was our first pick for the Blushing Blue Stocking Society. So me and Lisa from Remarkably Lisa, we did a live show discussion all about this book on my channel. So I will be sure to have that linked up in the cards above. We had such a fun time with that discussion video. And even though Lisa and I hardly ever agree on our ratings of the books that we read, that made the discussion all the more interesting. She gave the book 2 stars, I gave it 4 stars. So this is a really interesting and unique historical romance that I wholeheartedly recommend that you check out for yourself. It is book 1 in her Las Leonas series. So this is a historical romance series that features around this group of friends. So each book is going to be about a different friend in the group. So we have Luz Alana and Evan, our hero and heroine. So Evan works in a whiskey company. He runs a whiskey company. And then Luz Alana is a rum heiress. And so they are in Paris for this exhibition. So they end up kind of going toe to toe a bit. Luz Alana is just a badass, iconic heroine, and Evan is just entertained by that. And we see throughout the book that he does come to truly appreciate how amazing she is just as a businesswoman, as a woman in general. And so yeah, they can't deny this connection, this chemistry between the two of them. And so they do end up going into a marriage of convenience a little bit later in the book. And I really enjoyed this because I really loved Adriana's writing. I thought that it was very lush. She did a beautiful job of describing the settings that we were in, because the first half of the book we are in Paris and I felt like I was in Paris. Like, she did a fantastic job writing that setting in particular. And I also really just enjoyed the dynamic between Luz Alana and Evan. Evan is a delectable and delicious hero. He is hot. And Luz Alana, like I said, she is badass and an icon and an independent woman. It's one of the reasons why I didn't give this 5 stars, is that I feel like a lot of their relationship was based on the physical aspect between the two of them. There were some moments and some scenes where I did feel the emotional connection, but more often than not, it definitely was about the physical aspect between the two of them. But I will say, on that note, the sex scenes in this were hot. And I do want to throw out there that there is a lot of miscommunication in this. It seems to be a theme for me that I'm reading a lot of books with miscommunication this month. And that may be annoying to readers. And that was another reason why I lowered my rating from a 5 star, is that after a while it got to be a lot. There's also a revenge plot, which I love. Revenge plots. Evan and his brother Apollo are trying to take down their father, and love that. Yeah, this was just really solid, and I'm very excited about the future books in the series. As far as I know, book 2 is going to be a sapphic romance, and I cannot wait because I know that this author writes a lot of queer romances. So next, let's see. Oh, I had my reread of A Court of Frost and Starlight by Sarah J. Maas. This was for SJM Along. We already did our live show discussion on November 12th. So if you want to check out that live show, I will have that linked either up in the cards down in the description. You guys know the deal. But this was a reread for me. I am rereading all of Sarah J. Maas's books for the first time. And I have to say, I enjoyed this book the first time that I read it. I gave it 4 stars, and I enjoyed it as well this time. I gave it 4 stars, but I found myself getting kind of disappointed with some characters, like Reese in particular, just because I feel like this is a novella that is bridging the gap between the war in book 3 and then A Court of Silver Flames. And I just feel like in this book, a lot of characters were just relapsing into their toxic selves. And just upon reread, I realized that Reese is acting kind of like a child, like a teenager in this novella. And the man is over 500 years old. You know, he's Fae. And like, why are you acting like a child? Like the way that he talks to Tamlin, I'm just like, girl, can we grow up? you know? And it also is just hard to see like Nesta at pretty much rock bottom. Like, some of these characters just aren't in a great place, and that's just hard to read about. But at the same time, there's aspects of this that read like a cheerful Christmas novella, you know, and that's really sweet to read about. Next up, we have Baron by Joanna Shupe. This is book 2 in her Knickerbocker Club series, and I randomly read this because I came across both Crystal's review and Christie's reviews on Goodreads of this book, because I had read Magnate, which is book 1 of this series, some months back. And so I was just looking into what people thought of the other books in the series, and both Christie and Crystal gave this 5 stars and were just raving and raving and raving about this. So I just knew that I had to check this out for myself, because Joanna Shupe is one of my top favorite authors of all time, for sure. So I'm trying to make it a priority to read all of her backlist so that I can eventually do a guide to Joanna Shupe video at some point. But this is about Will, who is the brother of the heroine from book 1, and he is a railroad baron. Then we have Ava, who is a medium. So this takes place during Gilded Age New York City, and during that time, the 1880s, 1890s in the United States, spiritualism was a huge thing, and people, especially people of nobility who had money to spend, they were really into having mediums, you know, conduct these seances and try to connect with the dead. And so Ava is trying to take care of her younger siblings. Their parents passed away some years before the book started, and so she realizes that this is a very lucrative career path for her, and so she definitely is not the real deal. She is a fraud. I mean, there's no way around it, you know? So then we have Will, who is running for lieutenant governor of New York, and his running mate, who is running for governor, is a regular client of Ava. And Will realizes if it comes out that his running mate goes to a medium, that may be a scandal, and he may be perceived as straight up crazy and mad. So Will tries to go to Ava and ask her to stay away from his running mate, and she's like, who the hell are you to tell me who I can and cannot see, what I can and cannot do? And so this is a wonderful hate to love romance, because these two are just at odds with each other over this issue and over other things as well, but they also can't deny this insane chemistry between the two of them. And so they do start an affair, and oh my god, this was fabulous. I gave it 5 stars. This might be one of my top favorite romances by Joanna Shupe at this point, because I just loved this hate to love dynamic. I loved Ava and Will as individual characters and together. Amazing banter. Like some of the best banter that I've read from Joanna Shupe. There were quite a few lines that I had to highlight while reading the ebook of this, just because they made me laugh so much and they were just so cleverly written. And as usual, Shupe always serves with angst and passion. She is amazing at writing those things. So when you give me banter, you give me angst, and you give me hot sex scenes, like, that's everything I could ever need when it comes to a romance, right? I will say I have like one small gripe with this book, but it wasn't enough for me to lower my rating. But I do want to point out that towards the beginning of the book, you learn that Ava had a miscarriage. She was in love with this rich man who ended up just dumping her and throwing her away as if she was nothing, and she ended up having a miscarriage. And I would have liked to have had even just like a short scene where she told Will about it and he could have helped her with her healing, but we don't get that at all, which I thought was odd. For me, this wasn't like an absolute perfect book, but this was pretty darn amazing. Highly, highly recommend it. And I'm really looking forward to reading the last book of the series, which is called Mogul. And that one I believe is Marriage of Convenience. So next up we have Mercy by Deborah Anastasia. This came highly, highly, highly recommended from Bree from In Love and Words. So this is a dark romance, but there's definitely some comedic elements to this as well. I feel like this could be a good romance to check out if you're just now getting into dark romance. But basically we have Phoenix and Becca, our hero and heroine, and they met when they were kids. The prologue is basically them at the grocery store, Phoenix and his father, like right after he just murdered Phoenix's mother. And his father is being incredibly abusive to him, to Phoenix, and Becca comes across him, and even though they're like 8 years old, she stands up for Phoenix, and she calls him a mean man, tells him to stop hurting Phoenix. And so from then on, Phoenix has just been obsessed with Becca. And so this is a stalker romance, but this is like the sweetest stalker romance you'll ever read, because Phoenix is just a sweetheart. He's an absolute cinnamon roll. He is gone for Becca. But then they meet like 15 years later, something like that, and that's really where their romance kicks in. A big part of Phoenix's character, you can kind of tell from the cover, is that he has pretty much covered his entire body in tattoos because he looks almost exactly like his father and he doesn't want to look like a monster. And so he covered his body in ink to kind of disguise that. So I ended up giving this 3 stars, unfortunately. I was really enjoying the first half though. There's definitely this soulmate level connection between Phoenix and Becca. There's other dark things going on plot-wise, so there's definitely a healthy amount of suspense, so it's almost romantic suspense. But I found that as the book went along, I want to say by the 70% mark, I found myself feeling less and less engaged. And by the last like 20%, I was straight up bored and I wanted the book to end. So while I personally don't recommend it, Bree absolutely loves this book, and I know quite a few other people on Goodreads have given this rave reviews. So maybe check it out if the premise appeals to you at all. So next up we have The Scourge Falls Hard by Sophie Jordan. This is Sophie Jordan's latest historical romance release, and I haven't read her last couple of releases just because those books have gotten a lot of mixed reviews, but this book has gotten pretty positive reviews. A lot of people have been giving it 4 stars, and I have really enjoyed Sophie Jordan's historicals in the past. I've never given any of her books 5 stars, but I just really enjoy her storytelling, and this was no different. I gave this one 4 stars. This one also has a pretty unique vibe to it, and I really like the cover because I think that it's a really great representation of the story that's inside. So we have Gwen and Kellen. At the beginning of the book, there is an angry mob going around their small town, and they are hell-bent on hanging Kellen because him and his father have been pretending to be the Duke and the Duke's son, the Duke's heir, of this small town, this small village. So the real Duke showed up, and so Kellen's father just ran and left Kellen behind, and so yeah, these people just aren't happy with Kellen. And so Gwen, our heroine, is a blacksmith, which I think is so cool, and she's tall, and she's described as looking like a Viking queen. We love that. But she sees what's happening with Kellen, and she's trying to save his life, and the only way that she can protect him is if she tells the angry mob that she's in love with him, and Kellen plays along with this, and they decide to tell the mob, we're gonna get married soon, so you can't kill him. This is like an engagement of convenience novel because they don't get married until like the end of the book. And this was just a fun time. I think that Sophie Jordan does a really great job with the pacing of her books. I was engaged the whole time. Like I said, this has a unique vibe to it. I liked that both the hero and heroine, they're not members of nobility. I don't think I've read a historical like that in a very long time, because usually at least one person in the couple is someone of the aristocracy or of nobility. I will say I wanted just a little bit more spice. I usually expect a little bit more from Sophie Jordan. I feel like books that I've read from her in the past have been a little bit more steamier. But other than that, like I said, this was a good time. And if you're looking for a historical romance with a more unique vibe to it, I definitely would recommend checking this out. Next up, we have A Very Merry Bromance by Lyssa Kay Adams. This is book 5 in her Bromance Book Club series. This is a romance series that I have truly enjoyed, especially the first 3 books. Book 4, isn't it romantic? Not so much. And I will throw out there that this was not a 5-star for me, unfortunately. I did give this 4 stars, but I did still really enjoy it. So as you can tell, this is a Christmas romance. We're finally getting Colton's romance. He is a very famous country singer who is a part of the Bromance Book Club that this series centers around, and the heroine is Gretchen, who is an immigration attorney, and so she's kind of described as being like a Scrooge. She's definitely an icy, kind of grumpy heroine, and Colton definitely has a sunshiny vibe to him. I always love that dynamic in romance novels. And so this gave me like Hallmark Christmas movie vibes, and there is some steam in this. You know, Lyssa Kay Adams gives you a bit a little something, you know? It's definitely not closed door, which I always appreciate. And I do want to throw out there that Gretchen, the reason why she's so grumpy around Christmas is because of her really toxic family. She comes from a very, very wealthy family, and they've always just been really shitty to her. So just be aware that that is featured quite a lot throughout this book, how shitty her family is. But I feel like that is balanced out with how amazing Colton's family is and how amazing the Bromance book club gang is. So I enjoyed this. It didn't absolutely blow me away. I do always love reading about the characters from the Bromance book club. So this series is supposed to center around a book club, right? So towards the beginning of every book, they pick out a romance from a different subgenre. And so of course, for this book, they pick a Christmas romance, right? But the book club never discusses the book. I feel like there were maybe like a couple of lines of dialogue where it was mentioned. And we only get maybe like 2 excerpts from the book. Like usually Lyssa Kay Adams will include a few more excerpts and you'll actually get scenes where the club is discussing the book, and we don't get that in this book. So I'm like, girl, what is going on? Like the whole point of the series is that they're a book club of men reading romance novels, and we didn't get like any of that in this installment. So I was definitely disappointed in that. And the romance was decent, nothing that truly blew me away, but there definitely were some cozy Christmas vibes in here that definitely made me feel inspired to start decorating my house for Christmas. So, you know, good times all around. And then last but certainly not least, this is the book that I just finished before starting to film today. That is A Duke in Disguise by Cat Sebastian. This is a friends to lovers historical romance that came highly, highly recommended from my really good bookish friend, Samantha from Books with Samantha. And y'all, this book, it's taken me so long to finally read this book because there is no audiobook. And I'm someone that has kind of unfortunately become pretty dependent on audiobooks at this point. They just really help me get through books in a timely manner. And so when I don't have an audiobook, it takes me that much longer to like actually start the book. So I feel like I've been meaning to read this book for over a year. So I feel very accomplished that I finally got this book this week. But this is book 2 in Cat Sebastian's Regency Imposters series. Book 1 was Unmasked by the Marquis, which featured a non-binary main character, and I really loved that book. I gave that one 5 stars. This one I gave 4 stars. I still really enjoyed it. I just didn't love it as much as book 1. But this one is about Verity and Ash. So they both work in the publishing industry, and Verity asks Ash to help her out with publishing an erotic novel. And so Ash is an artist. He does drawings and engravings and things like that. And so she asks him to draw some spicy art for the book. And so another big part of this plot is that the reason why it's called A Duke in Disguise is that we find out that Ash is the long lost heir to this dukedom. And so there is a lot of drama involving that, while at the same time there is this really fun and sweet and sexy friends to lovers romance going on between Verity and Ash. You can really feel the connection between these two main characters, and it totally makes sense why they haven't confessed romantic feelings for each other. One of the things that I thought was interesting about this is that to me, Verity comes off as someone who is neurodivergent. There's some passages in this book where that may be the case, and I myself identify as neurodivergent, so I always appreciate representation like that. Also, Ash, our hero, is epileptic. It's been a long, long time since I've read a romance novel with a main character who has epilepsy, and I thought that representation was done. You could really tell that Cat Sebastian did her research on that. But yeah, I thought that overall the romance was really well done. There's a couple of really great sex scenes in this. The last sex scene in this, Verity has Ash tied up on the bed, and I love like the submissive vibes that Ash has and the dominant vibes that Verity has. And though this is an MF historical romance, it still is queer as hell, and I love that. Like, I just love Cat Sebastian's queer romances. Verity in particular is bisexual, And also Ash is a virgin hero. Like, there's just a lot of really cool tropes in here that I think are really well done. Just a very solid friends to lovers romance. I definitely would recommend it. So that is going to be it for my mid-November reading wrap up. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. I would love it if you would leave a comment down below if you want to discuss any of the books that I brought up in this video. I would love it if you would leave a like and subscribe, and I thank you so much in advance if you do. And with all that being said, I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!